Warning. The following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It's been a long time since I've left you without a dope beat to step to, and I'm very sorry, but I am back here today. This is a movie I've been looking forward to for a long time with a buddy of mine that I've been looking forward to for a long time from Hyper Heroes. You're all over the place, man. It's Adam Hlavac.
What's up? Were you really looking forward to revisiting this movie?
I was and I wasn't.
Okay,
because
that's fair.
This is a movie, and this is what I'll stop the vague booking. We're talking about, you must know because you downloaded it, we're talking about 2006's Superman Returns. And this is a movie that I feel like there are some comic book movies that people love.
Yeah.
Dark Knight, Avengers. There are some movies that people hate, the fan four stick and all that. Yeah. And then there's this movie that just like, people are like, oh yeah, I forgot about this one.
Yep. That seems to be my general run with people when it comes to this movie. People either, like you're saying, they either love certain movies, they hate certain movies, or it's Superman Returns where it's in the middle and people are like, I don't really know how I feel about this movie.
Yeah, this one is one where if anything, you're like, Superman Returns. They're like, which one was that one? You're like, the one with Brandon Routh? They're like, oh, the boring Superman.
The one where he's a creepy stalker?
Right. We'll get into all that today.
Yeah.
But before we do, I had to do this with X-Men, a couple of X-Men. We just got to get this out of the way.
Yeah.
There are two names that pop up that are associated with this movie, Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey.
Yes.
Since this movie, and obviously since, a lot of the other episodes we've done, a lot of nasty allegations, a lot of stuff coming around their name. They're heinous, horrible. Like we said on some of the X-Men episodes that I've done, obviously we condemn everything around Bryan Singer, and I don't think I've done anything with Kevin Spacey yet. But this show, we're just talking about the movie. I'm not talking about Bryan Singer as a person. I'm not talking about Bryan Singer or Kevin Spacey, what they did. We're just talking about the movie, but also recognizing that they are just not
janky people.
Yeah, they are not. They are monsters. They are flat out monsters. But with that out of the way, now we're just going to talk about the movie Superman Returns.
Yeah.
Let's get a little bit into the context of how this movie came about, because Superman, like Batman, was one where there were so many iterations flying around. Our friend, rest in peace, the late John Schnepp, did a whole documentary about the Tim Burton Superman, which I really wanted to see, man.
Now that we exist in a world where the potential for alternate universes or multiverses or alternate takes, things like the Joker movie, are a possibility, I wouldn't hate if they threw some money at Superman Lives, Tim Burton, even if it was just for HBO Max. I'd be kind of into it. Or DC Universe or something.
I mean, definitely DC. It used to be one animated movie.
Yeah.
They do 4.
True.
So
as an animated film, it would be dope and super possible.
Yeah, and I think you can obviously you can get Nick Cage in to do the voice.
They're not going to say no.
Right. So that was one that was flying around, and then there was the first iteration of Batman Superman that was going to be Wolfgang Peterson. It was even alluded to or teased in I Am Legend.
Yep.
Never happened.
Nope.
That brings us to Superman Flyby with McG.
Yeah. Oh, can I just say, so around that time, 2002, all the way up until we got to Man of Steel, or Superman Returns, I should say, it's 2004, 2005, I was glued to the internet following the evolution of those Superman movies, from McG to Brett Ratner, also another crazy character,
right?
And all that stuff, and seeing the Brandon Rouths and the Henry Cavill and the Josh Hartnett, the Brendan Fraser, all those actors being cycled through the rumor mill. It was one of the most fascinating times to be a Superman fan, to see the many directions that the next Superman movie would go.
And I think that was kind of indicative of something that a lot of critics of the character of Superman have said is this is a hard character to crack.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, yes, but I think it also really took and takes, even to this day, someone who just gets the character.
Right.
Like, you can't just hire any filmmaker to make a Superman movie. You got to find someone who really understands what makes Superman Superman, apart from the fact that he's quote unquote invulnerable. Like, that to me is not the interesting part about Superman. You know, there's so many other things that I think make Superman an interesting character. One in particular is like, Superman is someone who, as fast as he is and as powerful as he is, he can't prevent death and he can't be at two places at the same time.
Right.
What does that do to someone like that?
The powers of a god without the omnipotence
Yes.
of being a god.
Yes.
So Bryan Singer, he's on the set of X2. He says he comes up with this idea for a Superman movie. He actually runs it by Richard Donner, who did Superman 1 and kind of Superman 2.
A percentage of Superman 2.
But, you know, again, just to take a little detour for half a second, there's something to be said about, you know, there were definitely Tim Burton's interpretation of Batman was one thing, and there have been strong interpretations of comic book characters, but I've never seen anything quite like Donner's Superman, where that has defined the look, the sound, the aesthetic, everything of Superman almost to this day. Even when like Smallville was all based on the looks and the aesthetics created by that one movie.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, Kevin Feige talks about this too. And I don't know how true and how accurate this is, but they always say before they go into production on any Marvel Studios movie, Donner's Superman is the movie that they all watch. And it's something about the truth and the honesty and the heroism and the hope and the optimism that movie carries, that DC, whether fans want to admit it or not, it's kind of been lost through the years. And I think the comic books have done a really good job of going back to that aspirational sort of like iconic imagery and what those characters represent. Because it's very different from Marvel. Marvel is very much like, hey, it's like your everyday person who happens to go through an unfortunate circumstance where they get these abilities and now they have to deal with it.
Right.
Whereas with the DC comics, they're gods among men. And like how what makes that unique and different? And I feel like Superman the movie was able to tap into that really, really well. And I think Superman 2 is an extension of that, but then it gets lost by the time you get to Superman 3. So that's kind of like what I've always hoped and wanted from the Superman movies, which is why I think Richard Donner's take on superheroes has lasted this long, because everyone in some regard was able to kind of relate to that, or it gave them a feeling of like hope.
Right.
And that movie we can all admit that Superman the movie has its flaws.
Of course.
For multiple reasons.
But being like, in my book, like the first one out the gate to start all this.
It nails the messaging of like hope and optimism, I think, the best.
So it's interesting that at that point, you know, Bryan Singer decides to make a quasi sequel to 1 and 2 at that point. And this is where McGee, you know, leaves the project and it becomes Superman Returns. So now we're in 2006. Superman Returns. I remember the trailer. They had brought back the Brando voiceover. It was just beautiful.
That teaser trailer. I worked at the theater when that movie came out, and when like leading up to that with all the trailers, when that teaser trailer came out, I like cried almost, because you have Marlon Brando's voice narrating the amazing monologue from Superman the movie. Then you have the Planet Krypton theme playing underneath it with that imagery that made it feel like Superman 78. I think it was for sure my most anticipated movie of 2006.
Yeah, this was the year that also, you know, like X-Men The Last Stand was coming out, and we were all looking forward to that.
And obviously, like Smallville, there was huge hype around that show at that time.
Yeah.
So Superman was sort of like being brought back into pop culture and into everybody's everyday life in a big, big way.
Yeah, I remember being so pumped for Superman Returns, and this is I've told this story on Screen Junkies before, but it's one of my favorite theater going experiences. It's this woman brings an entire meal from Cheesecake Factory, and I was like, good for you, man. And then right as the Warner Brothers logo comes up, which, by the way, I love that they add the little Superman. At the very end. Yeah, it's great.
It's a good touch.
Her phone rings, and she picks up her phone, and she's like, hello? I'm at the movies. Superman Returns? I don't know where he's been. That's why I'm watching the movie. And I was like, I'm not even mad.
That's incredible. That's amazing.
I wasn't even mad. But I remember that day. I was like, wow, this was the first time in my lifetime, because I was born in 86. This was the first time I was seeing a Superman movie in the theater. He kind of disappeared, from the movies for a while, and then cinematically disappeared. Absent. And then he came back, and man, I was ready. So I ask you, the first time you saw it, like when you walked out of that movie, were you just like, wow, or were you like, what? Or what was it?
Well, even just going in, I knew that they were going to use the John Williams theme, the music. To me, that's like been such a big part of my childhood. So the moment that movie starts and you get the sort of a recap of like Krypton exploded, blah, 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 blah.
Sure, yeah.
Then the music starts and the classic theme starts kicking and you see the titles whooshing through. I was like, this is it. This is a Superman movie for me now that does all the things that I loved about the original one, and I'm so excited to be here. The movie ends, and I'm like, the first thought in my head was, damn, they were so close. They almost nailed it. They almost were there. They had all the pieces. It just didn't pop off the way that I thought. First of all, I thought the movie was way too long.
It is a long movie.
It's very long. And as someone who loves to rewatch Superman the movie frequently, that movie starts and it goes. Krypton is a little sluggish, but once you get to Kansas, it's a go. It moves really, really well. And then to Metropolis, it moves. This movie, it just kind of sits and slowly moves. And that was, to me, the biggest thing walking out was that felt long.
Here's the thing with this movie, because I loved this movie. I saw it opening night. I went back the next day to IMAX, and they had a couple scenes in 3D, which was really cool at the time. That was like a novelty at the time.
I have a story about that.
Oh, well, please interrupt it with the story.
Well, so I went, so they were only playing it here in Los Angeles. So I came up the street here at the Universal AMC. Was the only place in LA, I think, aside from maybe a few other theaters that were playing it, that IMAX 3D experience. One of my friends thought it'd be a good idea to take the poster out of the poster case so we could take it home. 30 seconds before the movie starts, we get kicked out of the theater.
Oh, no.
So I never got to see it in IMAX 3D.
Why? If you're going to take it, if you're going to be an idiot, after the movie, after you've watched it.
Not only that, at that point, we worked for AMC. So they called our theater. That person got fired. I didn't really get into that big of trouble because I didn't really do anything. So yeah, I never got to witness that movie in IMAX 3D, which kind of was a bummer. But,
yeah, it was really cool. I mean, again, like I said, at the time, I think that, and then a year later was Harry Potter, where they did a couple scenes, and it was before it was what it is now. But
dead.
Just dead as a doornail. I remember I was like, am I convincing myself I like this, or do I love this? Because I feel like public opinion swayed a lot. But here's one thing that me and Ed Greer, he's from the Nerd Goat podcast, we talk about this a lot, that comic book movies over the years go in phases.
Yes.
And I think in around 2006, you're in this phase of introducing a lot of these characters to people because they didn't know who the Fantastic Four were. Batman Begins was basically okay, the old way of doing comic book movies is over. Here's a reintroduction to the character. And then, as we started getting into the 2008s and everything, it was the building a universe. And then it was in Civil War and Batman v Superman, we got deconstructionalism. It was taking these heroes we knew and now ripping them apart. Superman Returns is interesting because it's in this phase where we haven't seen Superman on the screen for years.
20 years.
And they trot him out, and it's 100% a deconstructionalized version of this character. And I'm like, it's ahead of its time by about 10 years.
You're absolutely right. And, just as we were starting to record and you started talking about the movie, that was the first thought that came to my head was, damn, we're in a time now where you look at not just superhero movies, but you look at Star Wars, the Halloween franchise. These are all continuations of stories that started 40 years ago. Why didn't Superman Returns work? I think there's other things about it, but I agree with you. I think it was ahead of its time. I think if this movie came out now and it was a continuation of, Superman 4 or Superman 2, whatever they wanted to do.
Right.
I think that, one, they would have approached it a little differently. Two, I think that people would have embraced it a lot more instead of being like, why are we continuing one, why are we continuing after 2 and not 4? And why are we continuing this after a 30-year-old series in general?
Right.
Whereas now, when it comes to things like continuations of franchises, Star Wars, Halloween, all that stuff, we're into it. We're like, yeah, we want to go back to the original stuff. And obviously we can never get Christopher Reeve to come back to play this character.
Right.
But I like Brandon Routh a lot. And for what he was given, I like him as Superman. It's probably the closest thing that we could ever get to Christopher Reeve, his character or his version of Superman.
Yeah, and I think we're at a point now where like we've seen so many other Superman things in the last, 12 years since this movie, 13 years since this movie came out. Wow, 13 years.
I know, dude. That's when I graduated high school.
Yeah, I was just starting college at that point. I think we've seen so many things that, like watching this movie again to record this episode, it aged so much better because I was ready to deconstruct the character of Superman.
Sure.
And I really think that like this movie is like a beautiful one-shot Superman story of like, he is a god and he comes to this planet and he saves them and everyone loves him and he's needed. And then he goes away for just a minute and comes back and everyone's like, we don't need you anymore. Like, that's a really interesting, strong take for Superman because it's not depowering him like to make the story interesting. It's hitting the emotional chord and I love Man of Steel, but I think Man of Steel was trying to do something similar, but it's like it wasn't earned yet. But by putting Superman Returns in this continuity of at least 1 and 2, it's like you've already built up that people love him. So what happens when people don't need him anymore? Like that's a really That's a dark theme for a movie.
Yeah, and I think you're right though. But I do agree. I think Man of Steel and even Batman versus Superman to an extent, it touches on that and it tries to hit that note of like, okay, now we have this God who can basically do anything. Is it something that we want? Is it something that we need? And I think there's an in between somewhere between Superman Returns and Man of Steel, where you can hit the emotional impact of like, oh my God, I really missed this character. And now more than ever, we need this character who is hopeful and inspirational and something we can aspire to, but also, do we want it?
Right.
And it's that interesting question now that I'm thinking about it, we're sitting here talking about it. I never would have asked these questions. And I think it's the world that we live in currently, like our own actual reality.
Right.
And it is, what does Superman represent? And how do we want that portrayed in media? And, like Zach and I, we just did our comic book show where we talked about that of like, I just want a Superman movie where I want to like believe that there is hope in the world.
Right.
And we need that right now. And I don't think that we've really had that with Superman. Superman Returns is kind of like the closest, but it also does a lot of really weird things that I'm not into. And Man of Steel, well, we don't really know what's happening with that franchise at all right now.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the closest we got, and that's why I actually love the movie, is like the little bit of Superman from Justice League. I was like, ooh, give me a whole movie of that.
Yeah.
Minus,
this podcast,
minus the mustache.
I could really side rail this podcast. I'm not going to. I'm not going to derail this thing.
Let's talk about Superman Returns, though. I do think that the thing with Superman Returns is like, it's also like Superman has to, and maybe you tell me because you've seen this movie a lot too. Maybe I'm reading far too much into this, but it's like, his father tells him, it was like, they will look to you and like, you'll be a leader, you'll be an inspiration. And then he leaves and he comes back and he's just like, they didn't learn anything at all. And now they say they don't even need me. And just like, I don't know, there's something so empathetically sad about watching Clark realize like the entire world has moved on and Lois doesn't care really anymore. She wrote a award-winning article
Pulitzer
by what
Prize winning.
People don't need you. Talk about a Dear John letter. Good Lord.
Well, and I think for me personally, like where the movie fails is at the end of it, I'm never proven that the world that he lives in realizes and or accepts that like, no, we need Superman. Here's why. I think the story is so personal that we don't really get to see the world experience. Like he has 1 or 2 moments where he saves Metropolis, but we don't really get to see the impact of Superman's return around the world. We have a montage of it, but at least in like other Superman movies, we sort of get the perspective from around the world of like, how do people feel about Superman? And a lot of it is in Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman is done through like news. So it's like, I think there are moments where in order for Superman Returns to really work for me and for me to walk out of it going like, oh man, I feel like this movie justifies why we need Superman back, it never really hits that for me because it's so personal. He's so focused on Lois. He's so focused on what's happening in this small little bubble that we don't get to pull back and really understand the scale of like Superman Returns. He's back. He's been gone for 5 years. Do we need like, why do we need Superman? And the movie never really answers that question. And to me, it doesn't really set up a potential future for that character to live in. And then we never get a sequel and it's never explored again. And you're like, man, there was such an opportunity to convince, and honestly, in our reality, in our real world, to convince cynical people why Superman is a great character.
Yeah, not to turn this into a Marvel versus DC, because I really, truly hate that. But I think people said the same thing about Captain America. Like, how do you do this character?
100%.
And it's like the answer is you treat it earnestly and truthfully, and people will gravitate towards it.
Yeah.
This movie, because you don't have a sequel, because it's not your typical comic book blockbuster, it actually ends. If that's the end of that timeline, you're like, what a sad ending. Like, some other man's gonna raise his child.
Totally.
You know? And
it's
he's
like,
got to deal with it.
Yeah, and it's like, what happens when that kid figures out? I mean, the kid has a moment where he has like superpowers, but what happens when he turns into that Clark Kent teenage kid,
right?
And he doesn't have the guidance of like a person who understands what he's going through. Is James Marsden's character going to be like a Jonathan Kent, where he'll give him that advice that like Martha and Jonathan gave Clark when he was young? I don't know. We'll never find out.
But I do kind of like, that's where I think this movie, like, I give it so much credit for zigging when it could have zagged, where it's like, you see James Marsden, you're like, okay, he's going to be the jerk, stepdad that you can't, like, you're happy when he's gone. And then you're like, no, he's like a good guy. And
I'm so glad he wasn't, because I really like James Marsden, and he's done dirty in every superhero movie that he's in. And it makes me so mad.
That's why he was killed in the first 10 minutes of X-Men 3 was for this movie.
Let's not get into that.
But I just love that it's like, it makes it harder for Clark, because he knows like he's actually in a good place with this guy. And I think that's where like the dramatic tension of this movie, and where some of like these like, oh, there's more here than I thought. Like it's ideas like those, like, is Clark, he can lift an airplane, but can he be the real hero by like walking away knowing that this man could be a good father? You know?
For sure. I think also a big reason why I was ultimately disappointed by Superman Returns is a movie you brought up earlier, Batman Begins. And that movie did something so unique and different for Batman as a character. One, it made me love Bruce Wayne, and it made me care about Bruce Wayne, his journey, who he is, and the fact that like we follow Bruce Wayne in this movie a lot.
Right.
And in Superman Returns, when we're spending time with Clark, I kind of don't care. I'm kind of not interested. Like there's only Clark Kent on the farm is like, for me, the most I care about Clark Kent. Otherwise, I'm like, I just want to spend time with Superman, and I want to see the world embrace Superman. Whereas Batman Begins, they did a really good job of setting up Bruce Wayne and making me care about Bruce Wayne, that even when he doesn't have the bat suit, I'm invested in the character. And that's a kind of a tough act to follow. You're going to have Batman be reborn in a new franchise and do something so unique and different. Then when you do a Superman movie that's a continuation of a thing from 30 years ago, like, I also hoped that someday we would see Brandon Routh and Christian Bale in a franchise together, like in a series of movies. That never like plays out in any way, shape, or form like I thought it was going to. But I think that's the biggest thing, is I never really care enough about whether it's Superman, even some of the other characters in the movie, and I don't care about Clark Kent enough to like want to see where this journey goes.
Let's talk about Superman for a minute, because while watching this, I guess I just took for granted, but it's like this is a gorgeously shot movie, and some of the Superman moments are just so iconically great.
Yeah.
It's just like, I think one of my favorite, not just moments from this movie, but like a superhero movie moment from every comic book movie you can think of, is Superman just out floating in space, and he closes his eyes and just hearing everything. And you're just like, wow, like that's the first time I've really gotten, at least in a movie, a sense of like what Superman must have to go through in order to really focus, and like, how does he choose who to save? Like, that was such a cool moment for me.
And that adds so much scale to that universe and to that world. And it makes it feel real. Because, yeah, Superman can hear anything and everything going on in the world. How does he deal with that? And, yeah, like seeing that moment of him just floating off and his eyes closed, it adds again to my whole thing of like, Superman cannot be in two places at the same time. How do you make that? Like, that must be such a difficult thing for someone who's so powerful to go through. And yeah, like there are so many moments in that movie that do things like that I loved, that I wish we could have seen more of. Another moment that I actually really enjoy, and it really is a callback to Superman 1. It's just seeing Lois and Superman flying around Metropolis.
Yeah.
And I think from a visual effects standpoint, because the technology had advanced so much in 30 years, but also just, it was just nice to see Superman being Superman and letting him just reconnect with Lois Lane.
Yeah, and again, like, I loved that moment where, you know, they're floating. He's just like, what do you hear? She's like, nothing. He's like, I hear everything.
Exactly.
Like, I know you're upset that I left, but, like, you don't know what it's like to be me. Like, that was such a great moment. There are some really fun callbacks. The smoking thing.
Oh, so much stuff. Yeah,
statistically speaking, flying is still...
And I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's dumb. Like, do we need... But it's part of the same timeline. It fits to have callbacks to Superman 1 and Superman 2. You know, and obviously, like, the continuity gets kind of, like, murky.
Right.
Depending on, like, what cut of Superman 2 you watch. But, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things in that movie, a lot of moments that I think are really great. I think for me personally, just overall, as, like, a full package, it wasn't there. Like, there was something missing. Part of it is also the color palette of the movie.
It's very muted.
It is.
His cape looks like a fruit roll up. It's not like bright.
Yeah, and to me, if you're really going to go off of what Donner set up, you have to sort of embrace that like colorfulness, and that look is sort of passed on to then future Superman movies. I'm just not about it. There's just something for me that it doesn't represent what I think Superman represents, which is hope and optimism. And it's weird. Like, people might think that's weird because, like, oh, it's the color of a costume. But there's just something about Superman embracing the brightness of that suit that, to me, gives me a feeling when I see Superman. It's like, oh, hope has arrived.
Well, it should be the polar opposite of Batman, which is about hiding in the shadows.
Yeah.
And Superman's like, I have nothing to hide from.
No.
Come at me.
I can
with
fly.
My primary colored suit. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah, and this was the, like, Superman Returns, like, this is the suit that they ended up using, or, I mean, he didn't wear it, but they superimposed on Tom Welling at the end of Smallville. They even used the same shot of, I think they just put his face horribly on a Brandon Routh, like, background plate. It was bad.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. I mean, the suit's weird and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. But Brandon Routh to me was kind of like the biggest thing that saves this movie for me. I like Kate Bosworth. I think she's fine.
See, that's the one thing, like, I actually really love this movie, especially now after watching it. But the one thing that I was like, I feel like she's a little miscast.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to replace Margot Kidder, especially when you're doing continuation. Like, Margot Kidder had that energy and that, like, I don't know. It was like an engine that just kept going, whereas, like, Kate Bosworth, I don't feel it's there. I also... While I like, I don't know exactly how to word this, but I like Kevin Spacey in terms of I like the Lex Luthor that he plays in this movie. But to me, it also just kind of feels like, oh, you just ripped off Gene Hackman. You didn't really bring anything new to it.
See, I actually really like this interpretation of Lex over Gene Hackman's Lex. Is the one thing from the Superman movie that I think kind of holds me back from like being like, stop the presses. This is it. There's no other movies. Yeah. Just because there will never, in my mind, ever be a better Lex Luthor than Michael Rosenbaum. And I feel it's not possible. And I think that this one's...
I would say that Rosenbaum and Clancy Brown from animated series are my favorite Lex Luthors.
I just think with Rosenbaum, we got so much time that I feel like I understood...
He's a fully developed character.
Right. Why at the end he is the Lex that we know. So I feel like Kevin Spacey was almost like split the difference of a Rosenbaum and a Hackman. He still had some of the like campy moments, but he was a lot more sinister. But when he goes campy... oh boy, he really
chews it up.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
wrong.
I know.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
but Lois Lane.
Yeah. And it's tough. Like I do feel like that movie had kind of a tricky balance because yes, it's trying to move Superman forward, but it's also kind of stuck in time. Like the design of the movie, it has like this like Max Fleischer Superman look and feel to it. The production design, how like all the buildings look, even what Lois wears. Like, I don't know, it's like trapped in the 40s, but also it's a continuation of a 70s movie, but it's also trying to be modern. There's a lot happening in that movie that
It's kind of like Burton's Batman in a way where you're just like
100%.
You're like, what time period are we in here?
And that to me, and I don't know if that was done, if that was a design, like a purposeful design, because, well, we want to be a continuation of 1981 Superman 2, but we don't want to be set in 1984, 85.
Right.
We want to be in 2006. So, like, how do you address all that? You know, like, to me, that's part of me almost wishes, and like, you can't do it because you just can't, because all the other characters would have been aged up. But it would have been great if it was like 30 years later and like Superman came back to Earth and it's like, Lois' son is a grown adult and Perry White's not running the Daily Planet anymore. Like, what would that world have been if they would have just embraced a 30-year time jump?
And if you did it Interstellar style where like he didn't really age because where he went in space, you know, that'd be, again, like that's a cool one-off,
Sure.
you know, but I don't know if I would choose that to like relaunch Superman to the public.
You can't. You have to have like the things that we're expecting: Jimmy, Lois, Perry White, Metropolis, Daily Planet.
I love this version of Jimmy, by the way.
I like Sam Huntington a lot.
I think he like nails it.
Yeah.
Clark Kent. Oh my God. Like,
but again,
it's
it's again that thing of like it feels very like quirky and 50s,
right?
And I'm like, this is 2006. Does this work?
Is it?
That's what I mean. It's like the movie's unsure, and the movie never really tells us, but we just assume that it is what it is.
I mean, you know what's stupid is like I just watched this today, and I know there's newspapers on there. I'm sure there's got to be a date, but yeah,
I think it's all dated 2006.
Then that's even weirder if it is.
I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
I mean, Lex certainly has like a modern yacht that he's on. I guess the other thing, like, let's talk about Lex for a second. We talked about it a little bit, but like, I get his plot. It's also just like it's not the most compelling. I really wish, you know, the scene where he actually gets to, you know, him and Superman only go face to face once in this whole movie. Yeah. But when he stabs him, he's like, "Now fly." I wish we had more of that.
Totally.
Other than just like the real estate thing.
Yeah, and I think for that character to feel like he's evolved just as much as you would think Superman has evolved, he needs to do something different. And I think for him to just have another real estate scam, it doesn't convince me that this Lex Luthor feels a lot of rage and hate for Superman. Because he's kind of just doing, it's like, oh, I'm in real estate. I'm going to build a new Krypton. And it's like, yeah, but why? One, why? Two, what are you expecting to do with a new Krypton? Like, how do you think you're going to use that to your advantage to defeat Superman other than like, it's made out of kryptonite. I can kill Superman that way. Like, okay, but then what are you going to do with this giant Krypton? Right, what's the purpose of it? It's going to be your plot of land that you're going to like build an army to take over like, what's the point of it?
Well, he's like, other people will pay through the nose. It's like, but at what point is money just not that big of a deal anymore if you own your own island?
To me, I think it would have been, I would have been more interested in Lex Luthor if it was an evolution of that character of like, forget trying to build land. Let me fool the world into being someone who's like a very reformed person who can trick the world and basically take it over through business and technology. Where I think like Action Comics went with that character in the 2011 reboot, where he kind of goes into a mad scientist sort of phase. Yeah. Where I think that would have been really cool. And maybe finally we would have seen Lex Luthor in like some sort of mech suit where it's like, oh, you think that, you know, I'm going to trick the whole world into thinking that like I'm the good guy and you're not.
Right.
and then I'm going to kill you at the end of it and defeat you. That to me would have been more interesting and would have added a new layer to Lex Luthor that we up to this point have still never seen.
I mean, I always think the best interpretations of Lex Luthor in the comics are the ones where he's like, I'm on the side of humans.
Yes.
I'm on the side of us surviving. And that's why I said this in the Batman v Superman episode I did. I said, if you gave every line that Bruce Wayne had in Batman v Superman to Lex, it would have been a much better Lex Luthor, because that's what he feels.
Yes.
You know, he feels like if there's a 1% chance that this alien could turn on us, like,
That's Lex Luthor.
he's like, you guys are crazy to believe in this.
Yes.
I will show you. And we don't get that Lex in this movie, but I will say I do like the moments where, you know, Spacey does this thing where he kind of does the like, who's the father? Mm-hmm. Are you sure? And and I love when like Parker Posey is like, wow, Lex, what a show. He's just like, wait for it. Like when he decides to like really be intense and serious, I feel like it works. When it goes too campy, it loses me a little bit. But for the most part, I thought up until that point, it was a fine interpretation of Lex Luthor.
I think another line that I really like of his that doesn't really sort of get built out, or you don't really get to understand more of like what he means by that or what the potential of that is, when he's talking to Parker Posey and he tells her that gods are men with little red capes who are too selfish to share their power with mankind.
Right.
I'm like, cool. This is a take. This is a dynamic. This is like a message or something that he's thinking about that we never really get to fully explore. Like, what do you mean by that? What are your expectations from a character like Superman or a god? How do you want to exploit that? We don't really get any of that. It's more like, land. And you're like, come on, man.
Yeah, I think at a certain point, and I can't speak for him on many levels, but I feel like maybe Bryan Singer was more like, Superman needs a foil. He needs an antagonist, but I'm not that's a very much a B story. This is really about Superman and Clark coming back to a world and trying to like find his way after leaving it. And I think in that bubble, the movie works for me. If I think of it as this is a very long character study of Superman and this idea, Siri didn't catch. I will repeat it for you, Siri. You never notice that sometimes Siri just like pops in the middle of a conversation you're having, and
I'm not sure I'm hearing you correctly.
yeah, I don't think you are. But what I was trying to say is, I think if I think of it in that bubble as a intense character study of Superman, it works. I said this to Joe Starr because I was telling Joe that I was coming over here to talk about this. I was like, as a action comic book Superman movie, it's an F, or a D minus.
Yeah.
As a really cool cerebral like drama, intense personal thriller for Superman, like I think it's at least an A minus for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, I also don't know I don't think this movie necessarily needed Lex Luthor. I think you could have done other villains. I think, especially if you're going to do a Superman story 30 years later, I think you could have started off with like Metallo or something else. It didn't have to be Lex Luthor. In terms of action, I think the airplane sequence is really cool.
Oh, it's so cool.
I think it's so incredibly well done. And I think a lot of people forget that wasn't a Superman movie, because we've seen him save planes and all that stuff in other movies. It's such a good sequence. And I really wish that all the other heroic sequences were as good as that, because when he's going around, he's flying through Metropolis and he's saving and catching the globe, it's meh, it's whatever. When he pushes up New Krypton into space, it's fine, it's whatever. I really just wish that this movie would have, I think it's fine that it's a deconstruction. I think the first half of it would have been better for me personally if it would have set up more of like, how is the world dealing with Superman being back, and what is he doing to prove to humanity that not only is Superman the character important, but what Superman represents and what the symbol of Superman means is also important.
Well, I think I think you might have touched upon this earlier, but I think the other half of that like, what was, not just how is the world reacting to Superman being back, but we don't get a great sense of how the world was with him gone.
Exactly. We don't know what's happened in those years. And in our reality, like, we went through 9/11.
Right.
You know, like, was there not necessarily the exact same event, but was there something like that happened that really pushed people with Superman's absence to be like, yeah, we don't need him. We figured it out on our own. We didn't need a god.
It's funny that you bring that up because there was a draft where the events of 9/11 were in it, which really would have thrown the chronology all over the place. But they decided to take it out. Thankfully, I think.
I think that was a good call.
Yeah, I think that would have been in poor taste. Also, it's like you can't have New York exist and then Metropolis exists because they're like the same thing.
It's kind of based on New York,
Yeah, that's the one thing that bothers me the most about Cyborg from Teen Titans. It's like everyone's from like Coast City or Gotham, and he's like Detroit.
Yeah, I know.
It's like Detroit's the one place that exists.
Yeah, that's the one thing about. Well, whatever. That's a whole other conversation about DC Universe.
Yeah, but anyways, I agree with you. And you talked about the Fleischer, you know, like some of those shots of him like flying around the plane are 100% like
totally
homages to, and it works.
Yeah.
You also have to remember, this is the first time that we're seeing a Superman in an age of special effects where like we can see a Superman look pretty photorealistic doing a lot of this stuff.
I will say, hopefully your comments are not going to burn on fire. I think the flying stuff in this movie, in terms of how much we see Superman flying, I think it's better than Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman. I think the thing that made Christopher Reeve's flying sequences so special, you see Superman. You see him flying. And in Man of Steel, he's just kind of like zipping by. And like there's very few shots where we actually get to see Superman flying through the air. And Superman Returns, I think, is one of the first superhero movies that includes a character that can fly, where we get to see him fly. Because it's such a balletic thing to see Superman soaring through the sky. And any other superhero movie that came out before that, or even like The Matrix, when you see Neo fly, he's just kind of like zipping through the sky. And I love that Superman Returns embraced the one thing that I thought the Donner movies did so well. We get to see Superman soaring through the air. I mean, the last shot is a very long sequence of him soaring through clouds. And like, that was the stuff that I was like, cool, this feels Superman to me.
And then it just comes at the very end. I mean, so how would you have wanted this to continue? Because that's the one thing I think I'm like, man, it's such a bummer we didn't get a sequel. And then it's like, I don't know where you go from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, fortunately or unfortunately, I think the only way you could have moved forward, you would have had to have introduced a character like Brainiac or Metallo, or like it had to have been some sort of intergalactic threat.
Can I just say it's insane to me that we are in 2019 at this point with all these movies and we haven't seen Brainiac on screen yet.
Have you seen Krypton? Because they do a pretty damn good job with him in that show.
You know what? I was one of those cynical buttheads that was like, I don't want to watch a show about Superman's great-grandfather.
Sure. Yeah.
But maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, you know, the show is what it is, but I will say, like, I think it took a lot of ballsy swings to bring in Doomsday and Brainiac and make them so comic book accurate in terms of their look. I can't believe that we still haven't had that on screen. I can't believe that Doomsday on a TV show looked better than Doomsday in a movie. Sorry. But yeah, I think for a sequel, I think there could have been more exploration done with, obviously, Jason. Or no, what was the son's name? Is it Jason?
You know, it's so funny. I
can't remember.
Watched this movie today, and I can't remember. I think it is Jason.
I think it is Jason, yeah. But I think the next step is like, what's the evolution of the relationship between not only Jason and James Marsden's character and Lois Lane, but also with Superman? Does Superman become a bigger part of his life? And then also, yeah, I think, you know, a little bit more of seeing the world sort of, whether they embrace him or not, you know, how do they feel about Superman being back? In terms of the villain, you know, maybe Metallo, but I think you would have had to have found a way to incorporate Metallo into the world in some way of like, okay, who was this character before he was the villain? Other than that, I think really you had to go kind of like big with Brainiac.
I mean, I just feel like Brainiac, Metallo, even to a kind of an extent Zod, like they feel like they don't fit in the universe that this movie creates.
Yeah, I think it really kind of like feels more like the Donnerverse in that regard, that it's like not realistic. I don't really know what the term is. I think Zod and those three characters is sort of the most like intergalactic you could really go before you're like, well, yeah, where do you go next? So right. I don't know. Maybe Bizarro or some sort of like evil version of Superman, but I don't know. Then to me, it's like, oh, you're remaking Superman 3 at that point.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it is kind of it is kind of a bummer that this movie, like, it came at a time where it's like, I feel like we could have used a new version of Superman as running parallel to Batman. And then this one just kind of fizzled out. And I think a lot of people forget, but now it's, Brandon Routh is going to be playing Superman.
I'm so pumped.
It's like, do you think that they will put any nods towards Superman Returns, or do you think they assume most people don't even remember it?
I mean, when he was, when they first did the crossover with Supergirl, like he drops a hint. It was like, she reminds me of a cousin, one of my cousins. And I'm like, okay, we're hinting towards the fact that like Brandon Routh played Superman in another universe.
Right.
I love the fact that he's coming back. I wouldn't be surprised. Truthfully, I wouldn't be surprised if the Kingdom Come Superman that he plays is from the Superman Returns universe. I think you could completely make it that, because I don't think that the details of his universe are going to matter.
Right.
I think it's just the fact that it's going to be a Kingdom Come Superman from another universe that's now in this crossover. I don't think the details of like what happens in his world are going to be as important as like the big picture stuff, like generally what happened. But I don't think like they're going to get into the details of like, oh, it's Kate Bosworth, Lois Lane. I don't think that's going to matter.
I hope not. I don't think she's terrible. I just think like there's an aggressiveness that I feel like whoever's playing Lois has to have.
She's no Margot Kidder.
I don't even think she's an Amy Adams, dude. Like
No.
I think Amy Adams to me is like a great Lois.
Yeah.
She doesn't classically like look like Lois with the red hair.
That's fine.
Who cares? She's like such a go-getter and just
Yes.
so stubborn, and that's what you need from a Lois. And I feel like
She's got the drive.
yeah, I missed a little bit of the her and Perry kind of dueling. There wasn't as much of that as like I really like that with Lawrence Fishburne and Amy Adams.
100%.
I feel like I'm only saying negative things, and my overall takeaway is like I actually really like this movie, but I do feel like it does fit in a bubble. It fits in a little bubble that I acknowledge aside from all my other comic book movies. There's no other, like, it just doesn't fit into anything else. And that's kind of what makes it beautiful, and also what makes it like a little bit, I don't want to say inaccessible, but like it's not one that, people are going to run out and like put on in the background while you're cleaning or something,
No. And I'm saying this, but I'm not saying this. I'm not comparing the two movies, but to me, it kind of feels like a Joker situation where it's like Joker is its own movie, its own universe. It doesn't connect to any of like the DC extended universe, yada, yada, yada. It's its own thing. Even though Superman Returns does technically connect to Superman 1 and 2, it's also very much like its own thing.
Right.
Like it doesn't connect to literally anything else other than like we're using the vague history of what these characters did 30 years ago. Or technically 5.
And even then it's like they reference it like once or twice and they don't want to like commit to it. It's like, you act like you've been here before, Lex, and he just kind of gives a smirk like,
yeah, it's like, well, either the audience has to see Superman 1 and 2 or you're not making that sequel.
Yeah.
It's weird.
That's the thing. It's like it doesn't want to commit to being a sequel to those two, but it wants to use those two when it wants to.
I would say honestly for marketing, for like nostalgic marketing purposes of like, remember Richard Donner's Superman?
Right.
This huge movie from 1978, and also the sequel where we had all these other things happen. We're like, Superman got Lois Lane pregnant, but then she forgot at the end of the movie. But we're not dealing with that. So it's like you can't pick like. Lois Lane does not remember the events of Superman 1 and 2 in terms of it doesn't seem like she remembers. She doesn't remember who Clark Kent, she doesn't remember the fact that Clark and Superman are the same character. Or does she? Because in Superman 4, she remembers, but we're ignoring Superman 4. So it's like, it's so muddy and weird. And like, I don't know. Does Lois Lane ever question who the dad is? Why not?
Yeah, unless she's like the Virgin Mary,
Your baby pushed a piano across the interior of a boat. Aren't you kind of weirded out by that?
Even just a little bit. Speaking of like the little boy and everything, you're right. I think you said this at the beginning of the episode where it's like when you ask people about Superman Returns, they're like, oh, the one where he's a stalker. I never read it that way. I can see where you get that criticism or joke, but I never read it that way.
Sure, and I think also in 2019, now with the context of what we know about Bryan Singer, people probably represent like, oh, this is even more gross now. Right. I'm like, I can't. I'm not going to argue against that. I don't know if that was the intention. I would imagine no. If you're going to do Superman, we want to make Superman a stalker in this movie. I'm like, no, I don't think anyone went into that pitch meeting at Warner Brothers was like, cool, here's my take on Superman. He's been gone for 5 years, and he's a stalker, and he's really obsessed with Lois, and we're going to give him a kid. Like, I'm sure that wasn't the intention.
Fatal Attraction Superman.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that's a little bit how it played out. At least, like, when I watched it, I remember when I watched it, I thought, why is Superman so, like, I get that he's probably missed Lois, and now he finds out he's got a son, but, like, it's a little weird and stalkery.
I guess I always read it as, like, Lois is such a conduit to Clark of humanity, and it's like
it's his connection.
It's his connection to humanity, and I think like by understanding Lois, he kind of understands how the world feels about him, and you know, she wrote this piece. You know, for God's sakes, there was the love of his life writes why I, you know, if your girlfriend wrote like why I don't need Adam Hlavac after 5 years, you'd be like, oh, what? You know, like you'd be interested. So I get it on that most fundamental level.
Yeah, I think it's the execution is where it fails.
I mean, he's gonna hear what she's saying anyway.
Of course, yeah.
Which we've already established.
Yeah, and I think it's an execution thing. I think like all the pieces were there. I think it's how it's presented. You're kind of like, I don't know if I really dig this. I think this is a little weird. But yeah, I mean, I do think that because she is his connection to the world, I definitely think that as a character who's been gone for 5 years, he'll definitely feel like, well, I lost that thing that connects me. I don't understand the world anymore, and I don't understand her. And Martha Kent can only do so much for him because she's also very disconnected from the world. Yes. Martha is like in Smallville. She's moved on. She's like chumming it up with, you know, Ben Hubbard. They're probably in the sack together.
Please
you know. I'm derailing. No, but you know, like Martha Kent is in Smallville. She's not really engaged in the world the way Lois is. And I think that's why Superman really relies on Lois, is for that insight and that insight or knowledge on like what's happening. And now that she's gone and moved on, there's a disconnect. And he's like, well, what is my purpose now? But I just don't think it was really fully realized and executed to the best of its ability in this movie.
One other just little note that, like, in terms of just, like, I felt like it was perfect was I really loved Parker Posey's character. I think, you know, I read somewhere, and I don't know if this is true, but, like, they didn't even consider anyone else. It was like, this is Parker Posey, we'll get her, you know?
Yeah, she's Miss Tessmacher, but cooler and better.
But not quite.
When she smacks the crap out of Kevin Spacey or Lex Luthor in that one scene, I'm like, damn, she pissed.
And now everyone in the world's like, man, I wish I could have been her in that moment. Right? But yeah, no, I love that she like ultimately too, she's like, she's never 100% on board with everything.
Right.
There's also that just reminded me of like that really weird morose dog joke where one of the dogs eats the other dog and you're like, all right, that's weird. Like this whole thing is weird.
Yeah.
It's like very macabre. There's like a lot of macabre elements. A lot of somber, but I don't know. I use those same two adjectives for my all-time favorite Batman movie, which is Batman Returns.
Yeah.
And that also has a narrative story that makes no sense whatsoever, but it's such a character study.
I think the big difference is Tim Burton as a filmmaker and Bryan Singer are so different. Like, I feel like Batman Returns plays into the strengths of Tim Burton.
Right.
I don't think Superman Returns plays into the strengths of Bryan Singer.
Yeah. Returns versus Returns.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, this is a Returns. Look, Batman Returns, big hit. Mary Poppins Returns.
Yeah,
big hits.
True.
Superman Returns. This thing, it did okay. It made a little less than 400 million worldwide.
Yeah. But I will say, to your point about Batman Returns, big hit, but not well received.
No, that was the one that kind of changed the course of, in my opinion, comic book movies forever. Had it not been for Batman Returns, you don't eventually get to Batman and Robin, which means you don't eventually get to Batman Begins and Dark Knight changed everything. So I kind of feel like you trace it all back. But no one's going to say that about Superman Returns. It came. It was here.
Yeah.
It went. And no one really talks about it. And I kind of feel like that's a bummer because even though there are things in this movie, like obviously that we have pointed out that are not, you know, super great, the fact that these big ideas about Superman were made into a movie at a time where the character had been dormant for so long, and they came back with this mood piece, a cerebral mood piece on Superman. Like, it's kind of amazing that this movie even exists.
On top of that, if Superman Returns worked and people loved it and embraced it, and in 2009 we got a sequel like they originally planned, 2012 would have been the third movie of that franchise and not Man of Steel. What rabbit hole would we have gone down if that were the case? Would we have now in 2019, would we be on potentially the first Henry Cavill Superman reboot? What after you have 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, would Warner Brothers maybe have taken a different approach to the character and not done sort of what they did with Batman versus Superman? It's like, no, you know what? We're going to do a Superman movie that's about hope and inspiration.
Right.
It raises so many questions. It's like where we could be with Superman today.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it kind of all goes back to, and it's so funny too that they were just for so many years like, what do we do with Superman? And it's interesting that this is the one that they're like, all right, we're putting all our chips on this one. It's like, what a weird bet. It didn't really pay off, but what a weird bet.
Yeah.
And by the way, this movie, a lot of people, you say Superman Returns are like, ugh, the boring ones. Like, this has 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, it was liked.
What do you think it would get today?
I
given
don't
like
know.
the context of like Marvel Cinematic Universe, all that stuff.
I mean, just watching it today, that's why I said like I got more out of it today than maybe I even did 13 years ago, is because it's like, it does feel like such a palate cleanser. It feels like, oh, this is something new.
Yeah.
This is something interesting that all the other ones aren't doing, which is why I think it bodes very well for Joker that, they're doing these things where it's like, let's just toss out the rules for a minute, because I feel like I said this about Joker. I think it was Todd Phillips came out and he had a quote that he was like, we're not trying to compete with Marvel. Joker is something that we do that we feel like they just don't do.
Thank God.
And I feel like Superman Returns, you could say the same thing about. This is a movie that I really don't think like Marvel would make. Not in a negative way I'm saying that. I'm just saying like, this is just such a big swing, and Marvel has like their formula down. And I don't know. I feel like maybe people would be a little bit more open to it today.
Again, I think to what we're talking about earlier, I think this movie, if it would have came out within the last like couple years, or if it was coming out next year, I think people would embrace it a lot more. Because I think people at this point, we built out, shared universes and all that sort of stuff, and people now sort of embrace going back and revisiting things from the past a lot more than they did in 2006. So yeah, I think if Superman Returns were to come out this year, next year, the year after, I think people would have been a lot more open to it. And I think with movies like Joker coming out, even more so.
And it's interesting too, because it's like, look, if we're going to play the what if game, it's like, well, what if we took really into context, like, now Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey are out. You have another director coming in with this script, or at least these ideas, another interpretation of Lex. Would that have helped change things?
Sure.
Possibly. I feel like maybe, Bryan Singer did an interview after this movie was released a few years later, and he was talking about like you can't call this movie a failure, but the lack of success. And he's like, honestly, I probably should have started it with the jet sequence. I feel like you just got to get right to the Superman. And it's like, what if another director had come in and done something kind of Nolan-esque to it? And, would that have been the right choice? Or
yeah, I mean, nowadays, like, man, I would love, and it was rumored and there were conversations about it, but like Christopher McQuarrie coming in and doing what he did for the Mission Impossible movies and really being like, I want to do a Superman movie.
Yeah.
I think for Superman to be successful, you really, in my opinion, need a director who understands Superman, the heroism and the optimism, but also like the little things that really make Superman, and the struggles that he deals with. And it's not necessarily like, well, I think Superman's boring because I can't relate to him because he has superpowers. I'm like, but you're not supposed to relate to that.
Right.
It's not about the superpowers. It's the dilemma of like wanting to help people and not being able to.
Right, and like I said, I think Captain America kind of cracked the code on how to do that.
Yeah.
I think there are certain movies in my life that I wish I could jump into the multiverse and find the timeline where it exists. There's Tim Burton's Batman 3, which he would have done.
Oh my God.
Would have loved to have seen it. I would have loved to have seen Tim Burton's Superman Lives.
Same.
I do feel like I am living in one timeline where someone's like, man, I wish I could have seen that weird Superman Returns movie they're going to make. I'm like, it's here. It's in
Come
our
and get
universe.
it.
And I kind of like that this thing exists on its own as kind of like this weird footnote in the whole comic book movie genre.
Well, and I think too, because of the world we live in, because of how sophisticated superhero movies have become, how embraced they've become, how seems like we'll see with like things like Joker and all this stuff, and even Marvel doing that animated series What If. I think now is a perfect time to try and like maybe make a Superman Returns sequel, an animated movie. Obviously, you're going to get a different director. Obviously, you're going to have a different Lex Luthor. But like, bring back James Marsden, Kate Bosworth, Brandon Routh. I'd be up for them doing an animated movie of like, okay, what would we have done if we would have done a sequel?
Maybe this crossover and all the CW shows will light a fire somewhere.
Maybe.
But even if it doesn't, I implore you, if you watch this and you didn't love it, maybe watch it with fresh eyes. Or if you've never seen it because you're like, I heard it wasn't that great. Like, this is a movie that maybe it doesn't nail 100%, but it's so unique that it deserves to at least be watched and talked about.
I will never discourage someone from watching a superhero movie or any movie, but especially something that tried to do something unique and different. There's a lot of other DC and Marvel movies that I don't like, but I still tell people maybe the experience for you will be different from me. Maybe it'll open up something about the character that will connect you to them that didn't connect you before. I don't know. That's up to you.
Right. Well, that is 2006's Superman Returns. I think we have talked more about this movie than anyone did in 2006. Guys, they've been mentioning it on the Nerd Goat podcast, and I'll mention it here. We are joining forces for our own little Justice League. We're going to be working on a project together. We'll have more information coming up soon. But in the meantime, go check out the Nerd Goat podcast. And while you're at it, Mr. Adam Hlavac, where can everyone find you?
I'm on my social media is very easy. It's all just my name, Adam Hlavac. Every week I do a show called Hyper Heroes and Hyper RPG, and we've got a lot of stuff that we're planning on sort of expanding out. So just check it out. And thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, this was fun. I love talking about movies, especially love talking about movies that not a lot of people want to talk about. I know, and you and I don't really get to talk about movies too much anymore because we don't work together anymore. Aww. Sad. I'm as sad as Superman. Oh, no.